Hello and welcome to the state I'm in, where every conversation points north. Here we discuss the topics that Alaskans and perhaps everyone may care about. I'm your host, Manny Coelho, a fellow Alaskan and your guide to the conversations that Alaskans want to hear from the individuals who are leading the way. If you're watching from home, you might notice that I am not in the studio right now. I'm actually out of state temporarily on TDY for the military and taken this show on the road. And rather than coming up with an excuse as to why I should miss this week's episode, I thought, why not take the opportunity to share something that means and has meant a lot to me over the last month or so, and that is perspective. Now, if you've followed the show for any length of time, you know that once a month I like to just sit and wrestle with a topic. Sometimes it's not really a wrestle. Sometimes it's just a brief look over, but I feel like for this topic, it's something that has been reoccurring. I've noticed in the last few episodes, as I edit them, I continuously say, it seems like perspective. I point out the perspective of my guests, or maybe pointing out a certain perspective that they took in a situation or some scenario. And I am amazed by what people are able to do when placed in difficult situations. And something that I've noticed is that I tend to see the best in people, but have a hard time seeing the best in myself. And I can admire the choices that people make in their situations, but will overly criticize the decisions that I make in my own difficult situations. And so, in reflecting in that, in this episode of The State I Am In, I am wrestling with that topic and word specifically, perspective. If you've been following along for the last couple weeks, I've talked to just the last consecutive guests, Nikki Corbett, Delana Green, Jake Long, and last week, Clare Henry. All of them had different stories, and yet all of them, I noticed, had certain things that came up in their lives where they could have viewed it in one way, but instead they chose to see it in another and completely reframed their situation. And on the other side of that, great things happen. And so I wanted to just walk you through just a little mini synopsis of what I noticed from each of their stories. And if you stick around to the end, I'll honestly tell you some things that I have been encouraged to change my own perspective on as I move forward, thanks to these conversations with these individuals over the last few weeks. And so let me just walk you through what I mean. So Nikki Corbett, she grew up in Bethel. She's an Alaska native. Yupik is her culture and her identity. However, her mother wasn't a great influence, and felt like she missed out on a lot of what could have been in her childhood because of the negative influence of her mom. And if you go back to that episode, you can hear more detail about what that entailed. But she felt like she missed an opportunity to really embrace Yupik culture. And now many people know Nikki as someone who is like a champion of Yupik culture and can create beautiful pieces of clothing and art, traditional Yupik clothing, and is a champion of language and is learning language and is teaching language and created a Yupik language coloring book for kids and has just really taken ownership and reclaimed that part of her identity that she felt like she missed out on. And I pointed out, or maybe I didn't point out to Nikki, but one thing I realized from that conversation is that she could have just remained bitter and stayed disconnected from her culture and feeling like that ship had sailed and she just missed out on opportunity. But instead, she went back and embraced it, realized that she could go and learn the language, that she could go and learn how to make traditional clothing. And now she's sharing that with others, and people look to her as a voice of inspiration and a model, a positive role model to follow after. And just a really amazing story. I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. And even though, we all go through hardships, sometimes perspective isn't just about surviving hardship. It's about reclaiming what was always yours in the first place. And for Nikki, she chose identity instead of resentment. Would that resentment have been justified? Of course. But I feel like for her, that would have put a limit on what she was able to do, the level of influence that she's been able to have because she chose to reclaim that identity for herself. And then there's Delana Green. She loved music and theater since she was little and had dreams of going to California, where she felt like that's where her people were, where she could go and perform and sing and create, and that was the environment that she was going to thrive in until her and her husband decided to start a family. And someone gave her the advice that she could create those big things that she had her heart set on right where she was at in Soldotna, Alaska. And that whole perspective shift allowed her to take ownership of that and to create exactly where she was at. And she started teaching music and getting involved with music in the school district and in various schools and seeing the fruit of her effort right in the community where she grew up in. And then took it even broader to YouTube and started creating at that level to where anyone around the world could learn and grow and have music as a resource because she chose to create it right where she was at. Her perspective change didn't shrink her dream by any means. If anything, it grounded it, gave it a new purpose, and really gave her community something that it would not have had otherwise. And there's Jake Long, Jake in the Flying Pickles. Jake admits that he went through a pretty messy divorce. He said, like the kind that you see on TV, just really difficult. And his whole identity, circle of friends, everything kind of just shifted in an instant. And he could have spiraled out of control, could have threw himself at work or substances to try to numb the pain or to just forget about what happened. But instead, he leaned into something that had always been there, and that was a love for the extreme, the love for adventure. And so he discovered paragliding and went into that, jumped into that full force. And along with skating, ice skating, summertime, wintertime, it didn't matter. He was going to do something that made him feel alive and made him feel connected with who he really was as a person. And he didn't define himself by what ended through his divorce. Instead, he started to define himself by what he chose next and the things that he was going to do after that and the person he was going to become after that really hard time in his life. And so he used that as momentum to take him into where he's at now and living life to the fullest with Pickles, his dog, right at his side. And then there's Clare Henry. Gosh, I have put myself in Claire's shoes so many times over the course of just the last week. Her episode just came out most recently, and the feedback that I've got on that has just been tremendous. But Claire was 18 years old, applying to music schools, had such talent and a gift of music, and is in the process of applying to schools, and one day suffers a spinal stroke that had her paralyzed from the chest down and her future was literally just interrupted overnight. And you can imagine the devastation that that would bring. And yet, Claire just focused on one thing at a time, one wiggle of the toe, one lift of the leg, just one more inch forward, whatever she could gain, instead of looking at the big picture as a giant question mark or an erased um, dream. She chose to look at just day to day what she could accomplish, what she could achieve, and eventually did work her way back to the point where she could attend music school and could create. And doing all that and not even being 100% of what she was before, she still found a way because she shifted her perspective to I can't control what happened, but I can control what's happening right now, what I can do right now, what I can focus on right now. And that was just such a powerful realization for me to see that level of maturity and determination from such a young lady, and then to hear the beautiful things that she's creating because she chose to change that perspective and not just to throw in the towel and give up on her dream. Just speaks volumes what is possible when you choose to shift your perspective. All of these stories, I'm so thankful I got to not uncover, but to just catch a glimpse of. All of them are so different, and all of them I didn't really go into expecting to, pull out these different perspective changes that these people faced, but all of them did in one way or the other, and that was so obvious to me as I spoke with each one of them. They all, at some point or another, faced something outside of their control, and they could have, you know, stayed stuck in their circumstance or whatever was difficult. They could have just been overwhelmed and threw in the towel, but they chose to reframe it and to find a path to something meaningful, something powerful. And I'm not saying they said it was easy. By no means. I think every single one of them went through difficulty, went through hard times, and would not say that it was an easy process. But the outcome, what came of all of that, because they chose to look at it differently, there's no denying that they are in a better spot because of that. On this trip that I'm on, I wanted to take a couple books with me, and one of the ones that I brought just so happened to be The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and I wanted to just read a portion of that because I think it's just very timely, and I think given this context, it will help reinforce this thing that I'm kind of learning myself right now. And so Ryan Holiday, he's a big voice in Stoicism, and this book is kind of an extension of that thought and that set of beliefs. So I'll just begin by this Viktor Frankl quote that he shares to open up his chapter on perspective. He says, "Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any instant." He goes on to share this story of an Athenian general named Pericles. He says, cast off on a naval mission in the Peloponnesian War, the sun was eclipsed, and Pericles' fleet of 150 ships was cast into darkness. Surprised by this unexpected and confusing event, his men were thrown into a state of panic. Unlike the crew, Pericles was undaunted. He walked up to his lead steersman, removed the cloak he was wearing, and held it up around the man's face. He asked the man if he was scared of what he saw. No, of course not. So what does it matter, Pericles replied, when the cause of the darkness differs? The Greeks were clever, but beneath this particular quip is the fundamental notion that girds not just Stoic philosophy, but cognitive psychology. Perspective is everything. That is, when you can break apart something or look at it from a new angle, it loses its power over you. Fear is debilitating, distracting, tiring, and often irrational. Pericles understood this completely, and he was able to use the power of perspective to defeat it. The Greeks understood that we often choose the ominous explanation over the simple one, to our detriment. That we are scared of obstacles because our perspective is wrong, that a simple shift in perspective can change our reaction entirely. The task, as Pericles showed, is not to ignore fear, but to explain it away. Take what you're afraid of when fear strikes you and break it apart. Remember, we choose how we'll look at things. We retain the ability to inject perspective into a situation. We can't change the obstacles themselves. That part of the equation is set, but the power of perspective can change how the obstacles appear. How we approach, view, and contextualize an obstacle, and what we tell ourselves it means determines how daunting and trying it will be to overcome. It's your choice whether you want to put an I in front of something. I hate public speaking. I screwed up. I am harmed by this. These add an extra element, you in relation to that obstacle, rather than just the obstacle itself. And with the wrong perspective, we become consumed and overwhelmed with something actually quite small. So why subject ourselves to that? The right perspective has a strange way of cutting obstacles and adversity down to size. But for whatever reason, we tend to look at things in isolation. We kick ourselves for blowing a deal or having to miss a meeting. Individually, that does suck. We've definitely missed 100% of that opportunity. But what we're forgetting in that instance, as billionaire entrepreneur Richard Branson likes to say, is that business opportunities are like buses. There's always another one coming around. One meeting is nothing in a lifetime of meetings. One deal is just one deal. In fact, we may have actually dodged a bullet. The next opportunity might even be better. The way we look out at the world changes how we see these things. Is our perspective truly giving us perspective, or is it what's actually causing the problem? That's the question. Ryan Holiday goes on to talk about how perspective has two definitions: context and framing. Context is a sense of the larger picture of the world, not just what is immediately in front of us. And framing is an individual's unique way of looking at the world, a way that interprets its events. Both matter, both can be effectively injected to change a situation that previously seemed intimidating or impossible. So, just reflecting on those pages in that book, reflecting on the conversations that I have been able to share with you all and just to experience firsthand myself with the guests on this show, I've been challenged to really look at my life in a different light. Because we all have things that are going on where we feel like we're narrating them in a certain way where there is no hope or there is uncertainty or we're just dissatisfied with the way they are. But when you take a moment to actually shift your perspective on it, a whole new world opens up. And like I said in the beginning, I wanted to just share with you some down to earth, real deal things that this has really made an impact in my life by just reframing and looking at it differently. The first one is in my marriage. And I don't really talk a whole lot about my marriage on this podcast, but my wife and I have felt strain lately. I'll just put it at that. Life gets busy, time gets away from you, time with each other gets away from you, stuff happens, life happens, and then you find yourselves arguing more than connecting and or just maybe being roommates. I think we've all probably have been there. If you have a spouse or a significant other that you love, you might get to a point where you feel like you're just cohabitants and not really serious partners. And we found ourselves in that place recently, and we had a great conversation one night that kind of shattered all of that. And one of my commitments to my wife after that conversation was that I was going to view our relationship with gratitude every day. And I thought that that would be a good starting point for us to kind of rebuild what we felt like we had lost over, whatever length of time. And so I committed to just telling her what I was grateful for every single day rather than focusing on all the negative things, rather than focusing on all of the check boxes of things that we have to do with the kids or with the budget or with our goals and our jobs. I was just going to start every day with telling her something that I was grateful for, part of her and her character, and just expounding on that. And it made such a huge difference in our relationship, like such a huge difference of taking 5 minutes to just be thankful for a certain quality or a certain thing about her. And she would do that. She would reciprocate. She would say the same thing about me. So it was like a joint effort, but it changed our relationship. I don't think I have felt as close to my wife in a very, very long time. And all it took was just shifting away from all of the crap, all the garbage, all of the stressors, and just focusing on the things that I knew to be true about her that I loved and that I was grateful for, that I was thankful for, and starting my day and her day with that. So that's the first thing. The second thing has been my own health goals, I guess you could say. For example, I do work out. I don't do it regularly. I don't do it nearly as much as I want to. And since I talked to Claire specifically, uh, her level of commitment to movement, to being able to just take a step, to wiggle a toe, like she said, it really made me consider my own lack of determination, my lack of motivation, my lack of discipline in some areas. And I was like, I have limbs that move at 100%. I have my toes that can wiggle with no problem. It's not a big deal. And what am I doing with them? Why am I not trying to achieve the goals that I've set out for myself physically? With my cardiovascular health, with my physical strength, and I have no excuse. I didn't have a spinal stroke, and yet I treat my body like it's just a given. And man, that fired me up. And I've been going to the gym, I've been running, I've been anytime something is hard, I'm like, Claire had it harder. And it's motivation for me to keep going. And that conversation with her meant a lot for me in that realm of just health and movement and building strength because she's still working towards regaining a function that was lost and she's still going to doctor's appointments and follow-ups and imaging appointments and what's my excuse? I don't have one. So, and the last thing that I'll share is actually something that Jake really encouraged me with just through our conversation. Jake is all over social media, has hundreds of thousands of followers, and you see him paragliding and skating and like all this really cool stuff, right? Jake works like 40 to 50 hours a week, well, as a welder, and he still gets out there. He still does the thing. He plans what he loves around what he has to do. And there's been so many things that have come up in my life that I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool to start that, or I'd really want to try that. And I just let life get in the way. I go to work or, have family time. I, prioritize all these different things except the thing that I really think I would enjoy doing and want to do. And so after talking to Jake, one of the things that came to my mind was that I knew I needed to do was get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been wanting to do it for a long time. It's been kind of in the back of my head. It's a sport that I would never really choose to do as a kid or as a young adult. But you know what? In my almost 40 years of age, I think it could add a lot of value to my life. And I got to shout out Jordan Contra from Hold Fast Grappling and Homer. Our conversation, a couple months ago, fired me up for this, and I just had excuse after excuse after like why I couldn't go and train and go and do it. And yeah, recently Redemption MMA in Soldotna is putting out a special deal for new adult members, and I was like, you know what? This is my freaking sign. I got to do this thing. And so I hit him up, and once I get back to Alaska, me and my son are going to get after it, and we're going to start doing this thing. And like I said, I've never done it, but I know I want to. I know I want to give it a go, and so I'm committing. 12 weeks, I think is what it is. I don't think I'm going to regret it. I know I got a lot of stuff going on, the podcast with work, Little League Baseball's coming up, going to be coaching that, but life's too short to miss out on the opportunities to do the things that you want to do when you can actually do them. I don't want to be sitting around in my, God willing 70s, 80s and be like, it would have been really cool to know what that would have been like. So I'm taking that opportunity. And now I've told you guys, you can hold me to it. So, none of my guests over the last couple weeks have avoided hardship. They were pretty real with the difficulties that they experienced, but they found a way. And a big part of it was just reframing their perspective, reframing their view of the problem in front of them and finding a way to get on the other side of that just through shifting the way they looked at it. And that changed everything for them. So as you look at your own life, as you look at the things that are maybe challenges in your world, the things that you're telling yourself, think about how you can look at it differently and what could possibly be on the other side of that if you chose to do that. So hopefully you got something out of that this week. Let me know. where you're at, what you're going through, something that maybe you found helpful as you change your perspective on life and the things that are going on around you. But until next time, keep North Alaska, and thanks for joining me on the state I'm in.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider supporting the show by joining me on social media. Each week, I share the most thought-provoking, jaw-dropping, or just interesting moments from conversations just like you heard today. I'm currently on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at The State I Am In Podcast. Engaging with me on social media by liking, sharing, reposting, and commenting what you think is a simple and cost-free way to help other Alaskans and people everywhere find these conversations. You can also subscribe on YouTube and wherever you're listening to podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple, or iHeartRadio, wherever. Be sure to leave a review. These small actions really do make a huge difference. I'm committed to growing the state I'm in by sharing thoughtful, honest conversations and voices from all across Alaska. And if you or someone you know has a story that reflects Alaska beyond the postcards, gift shops, and tourist traps, I'd love to hear from you. Now, more than ever, I believe sharing the voices of our fellow Alaskans truly matters, and I will continue to do this work for as long as there are people willing to sit down and share meaningful conversations. Keep North Alaska, and thank you for joining me on The State I Am In.